Hi everybody. In this video, I'm going to discuss two short readings, one by Schrader et al., which means and others, and one by Jennifer Radden. Let me share the screen with you here. There we go. Okay, in Mad Pride, Reflections on Socio-Political Identity and Mental Diversity in the Context of Culturally Competent Psychiatric Care, the authors give us a brief overview of the movement to depathologize unusual mental states and to discuss implications for mental health nurses and other providers. The authors point out that taking their lead from LGBTQ pride events as their model, MAD identified groups have organized parades and rallies that function as displays of difference. This allows socially excluded individuals to take over their experiences and begin to redefine themselves. Influenced by the work of cross-disability theorist Tobin Siebers, the authors define identity as, quote, the active and thoughtful positioning of the self with respect to dynamic social narratives regarding mental difference and diversity. To identify is to actively stake a personally and socially meaningful place in this complex assemblage of social, biological, and environmental forces, an assemblage that importantly includes and actively grapples with distress and psychological pain. The idea is that some call for mental health consumers to work against the hurtful terms used to refer to them. There is no broad consensus about what terms should be used instead, or about how individuals can best forge their identities, but there is a wide agreement by those in the movement that the project is to take more control of the process of self-redefinition. The authors point out that diversity exists within the so-called MAD movement. So some activists emphasize the differences between madness and normalcy, while others see madness and normalcy on the same continuum. Some activists within the MAD movement make efforts to distinguish distress from unusual mental states and recenter the focus of treatment and intervention on the largely psychosocial factors that contribute to distress rather than the unusual experiences themselves, such as hearing voices. So, for instance, the voice hearers movement focuses on transforming voice hearers' relationships with their voices rather than on attempting to eliminate those voices. At the end of the article, the authors recommend that mental health care clinicians should be more aware of the impact that their own explanatory frameworks have on individuals. They say that these clinicians, rather than imposing a pure clinical or psychiatric interpretation on their clients' experiences, should try to facilitate a more individualized process to help those individuals make meaning from their so-called symptoms. Now, switching to the Jennifer Radden article, which is entitled Recognition Rights, Mental Health Consumers, and Reconstructive Cultural Semantics. Radden utilizes the work of critical theorist Nancy Fraser to highlight the redistributive paradigm and the recognition paradigm. The redistributive paradigm concerns economic ways of moving wealth from people who have more to people who have less. The recognition paradigm, which Fraser argues is just as necessary as the redistributive paradigm, they both involve justice and they depend on each other, aims to eliminate injustices that are based on cultural patterns of representation, and also communication and interpretation, by which she means how people are viewed, understood, and thought about. She says that the mentally ill have been subject to misrecognition and have been damaged as a result. The recognition paradigm, according to Radden and Fraser, would proceed along two stages. First, a redefinition of group identity, and second, a result of the first, the elimination of oversimplifications and stereotypes about certain groups' identity and allegiances. The ultimate goal for some is to put the group out of business as a group so that individuals will be able to flourish as individuals rather than continually be associated as part of a stigmatized group. Radden points out that many mental health consumers disagree with the second of these goals, so she focuses more on the first in this article. Radden argues that mental health care consumers have a right to be represented fairly and not to be stigmatized about their mental disorder. But a fair representation can't be achieved, she reasons, by a mere name change, because the stigma and discrimination against them is so historically entrenched and pervasive. The larger challenge is to reconceptualize all aspects of the ways mental disorder is construed, not merely the terms used to refer to it. Radden then makes several more points about the way conceptions of mental health care consumers should be thought of and represented, and her discussion of the importance of counter-stories is important and enlightening. She also discusses the good and bad about what is called lack of insight of an illness, where one of the symptoms of some mental disorders is that the individual is not aware that they have a mental disorder. She gives two implications of the clinical role of insight into illness that you should pay attention to. Finally, Radden says that a group should not choose their own group identities by themselves, because this would impose a unitary, over-simplified conception, which would discourage cultural dissidence, experimentation, and cultural criticism. So she thinks the two should work together, that groups should forge their identities as a result of their interaction with society and be subject to criticism and debate and critical thinking, rather than just all get together and define themselves as a group in just one sort of fail swoop. I hope this video has helped you understand this very interesting reading. Thank you for your time and attention. Bye-bye.